Welcome to Building Web3. Today we explore how Nillion is transforming the trillion-dollar AI industry with its revolutionary blind computer technology. Discover their groundbreaking advancements in privacy-preserving computation and how they're redefining the future of AI and Web3. Remember, nothing stated here is financial advice. All right, welcome to the Building Web3 podcast. Today we have a good friend, Mathias, here. He is an AI research at Nillion. Mathias, could you give us a brief introduction into your background and what were you doing before you joined Nillion?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. So my background is very technical. I'm an engineer by education. Sort of veered into the AI machine learning space shortly after that. Spent some time researching autonomous navigation at Mercedes. So that was quite cool. Was involved in an AI startup. That was sort of my first venture into the wonderful world of tech startups, of AI startups, that went all the way from sort of, just an idea at a kitchen table to actually something that resembles a product, some traction, and then eventually an acquisition. So, the full circle. And after that, I graduated and I joined my first AI startup quite early on. I think today, I work quite closely with some tech companies like Google and Amazon mainly. Now I think there are like 100 to 150 employees, so like the growth was quite rapid. So that was a really interesting thing to be a part of. And during that period in time, I got to know Nillion. And when I first heard about what they were building, I was like, whoa, that was like a complete holy shit moment, because I had no idea that the technology that they were building and that they were just like, oh yeah, of course it's possible, that existed. And as soon as I knew that, then it just kind of like clicked, and I was like, okay, I'm in. This is, this is just fantastic that this is possible, and this is something I want to contribute to.
Absolutely. Okay, so we started with, we call it AI autonomous driving. It's very funny.
Yeah,
I've had many
exactly.
friends, start in the like autonomous driving space, like friends at Tesla, and then transition to working at Google in AI. Is there a lot of, I assume, AI in autonomous driving?
Yeah, there definitely is. I think I was working on it at a time when things were a little bit less advanced than what I assumed them to be today. But essentially, what I was mainly focusing on, which is one of the AI heavy aspects there, is something called 3D object localization, which is a very fancy way of saying knowing where things are, which is usually quite helpful if you're trying to navigate. So yeah, and that involves a lot of sort of visual recognition of objects and where they are, which is very heavily AI based.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Nillion and the mission, kind of why you decided to sign on with them and what they're trying to accomplish in the Web3 space.
Yeah, sure. So essentially what Nillion is trying to do is we're trying to build what we call humanity's first blind computer. And essentially what a blind computer is a completely new way of doing computation. So instead of computation in the traditional sense, where you get an input, you do some operations on that input, and you turn some output, with the problem there being is that the party doing the computation gets to see all of the information, all of the data. To go from that to a completely new paradigm where the party that does the computation never actually sees the input, yet it is still able to perform the same operations. So it is done in a completely blind manner, a completely privacy preserving manner.
Is this like homomorphic encryption where they don't actually need to like decrypt the data in order to like perform operations on it, or how does this essentially work if they don't see the like underlying data?
Yeah. So homomorphic encryption is a very strong. It's a very similar topic. There are essentially other ways of achieving the same purpose as well. One, for example, which is currently our main focus, is called multi-party compute, where essentially sort of the idea is, and I'm sure that any PhD in cryptography listening will probably hear this explanation and think I completely butchered it. But essentially, the idea is that you take an input, chop it up into pieces, give one piece to each person are kind of independent from each other. And you can do that in such a way that the piece of data that they receive is not enough to really know anything about the original information. So there are multiple technologies that kind of do this. Um, and essentially, what we want to do is we want to make it as easy as possible for people to just write and run a fully privacy preserving program. So you don't need like a PhD in cryptography to like figure out if you need homomorphic encryption or you need multi-party compute or you need like whatever setup. They're just like, look, I write this program. This is what I wanted to do. Step one, do this. Step two, do that. And then just click deploy, and the sort of our compiler then figures out what the best way to do it is.
Absolutely. And for people that are already like, whoa, homomorphic encryption, splitting up, sharding, I'm already confused. Just think about it if you had like a bunch of money, right? And you wanted, each person, like you wanted people not to know the total. So you split up the money, you pass it out to a bunch of friends, and you just say, hey, count whatever total I passed you. And then you kind of sum it up at the end. It's a very loose way of understanding it, but it helps in the sharding perspective of being like, okay, we're giving these people, and then they don't actually have enough data to know the entire total themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So let's talk about some of the like key features and functionality of Nillion and kind of how you guys go about accomplishing this. Because clearly there's some kind of sharding of data. There's then like I assume, yeah. Let's talk about the life of a I like to call it the life of a transaction, although this isn't really a transaction. Let's say somebody's starting with Nillion. How does it work? Is it like a cloud platform? Are they like signing into a portal?
Yeah, sure. So essentially the way that works is, so let's say, for example, that you want to run an AI model in a completely privacy preserving way. There are some inputs, there is some model doing some kind of magic, and then there is an output that gets sent to someone. The way that would work is, well, we've got a library called Nada AI, and Nada is, of course, Spanish for nothing, so nothing blind. Kind of the connection is there. That is very similar to. I mean, first of all, it integrates in Python. So, like for a developer, they're used to Python, like nothing dramatically new there. So it's very, very close to what people are comfortable with. We've essentially built a framework where they can just build a model in exactly the same, in a very similar way to, for example, PyTorch, to just existing frameworks that anyone who knows anything about AI is very familiar with. Build a model, compile it using our tech stack, our compiler, and then send it to the Nillion network, or run that program rather in the Nillion network. So that's the way that works.
Got it. So there's like some SDK or some package that you import via Python. You build your model, and then you send it to the network. And the network is allowing people, I assume, like multiple validators to help you process that transaction. And then each individual validator doesn't have enough information to know the end result. They just know their individual slice of whatever the sharded computation was. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of complexity going on there that maybe is a little bit too much, too much information to get into here. But like the very nice thing is that you, as like a developer, you don't know, and frankly, I mean, you don't really care. You just like, look, this is my model. I want to run it. I don't want to leak anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just figure it out, right?
Yeah.
And that's essentially what this way of working allows.
And let's talk a little bit about some of the use cases on like why this blind computer would be so important, because people might be like, I guess I could theoretically see, but let's talk about like what are the primary use cases? Is it like, hey, multiple people are playing some Web3, I don't know, solitaire game, and they can't see the other people's cards and everything is public, or like what are some of the use cases you guys see for this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are already people, like actually quite a number of them, building really interesting stuff on our network using our technology, which I'll touch on in just a second. But I think if you really want to get a feeling for what the potential is, and actually the way that I like to think about it and what gets me really excited about it, is to ask yourself the question of what if privacy, security, what if that was just implicit? Then what would happen, right? For example, in AI, if you do anything in like image recognition, everything is on a data set called MNIST, which is a handwriting recognition data set. Well, why is that? Because it's very sort of low sensitivity, just like a bunch of written numbers, and then people can try to figure out what that number was. What if all those millions of people that are trying to push the boundaries of performance on this data set could do exactly the same before medical imaging? Because the technology is exactly the same, right? What if all of those millions of people, instead of beating the benchmarks of figuring out whether a number is, the number 1 or the number 7, they're actually curing diseases? They're figuring out novel ways to predict certain rare diseases, for example. You're able to gather all that information, and in a completely privacy-preserving manner, people are able to innovate and to make serious advancements. How many diseases would there still be left? I don't know. I'm not a medical person, but it's a very interesting train of thought to follow, not only in the medical domain, but essentially in any domain that people kind of know the ins and outs of. Just the white space of like what ifs that this opens up, which is ultimately our dream of making privacy preserving computation as easy and as accessible as not privacy preserving or just like regular computation. It's just immense. But as for more specific things and like less dreamy stuff, although I do enjoy to dream every now and again, there are loads of people building very interesting stuff. Like, for example, there are people building completely secure messaging platforms, completely secure decentralized password management. There are people working with DNA sequences. Like, how do you store that in a fully privacy preserving manner? How do you process that in a fully privacy preserving manner? We've got people doing federated learning, for example, which is a company called Rainfall, or a project called Rainfall, for example. So the sort of the variance is quite high, but the different projects are quite different from each other. But that's just because the range of what this suddenly completely new way of doing things just allows. There's in every sector, in every domain, almost there is kind of like this idea of, oh wow, well actually, if this technology exists, we can solve this problem, or we can do this thing that we used to do in this very roundabout way, just like in this very simple manner. Really exciting stuff, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Let's take the example of a password manager, because I think this is where like more people resonate with. They're like, yeah, it's privacy, or maybe even like an ads platform. But let's start with the platform, the password manager. Are you essentially saying like, hey, if we had a decentralized password manager, you have like a username. That username would then be sharded and stored on like multiple different devices, and then Nillion would essentially kind of bring it together and then deliver the end result. And that way, it's not just like some field in a database where it's like look up Jax Dwyer's username for Riverside FM.
Yeah, exactly. Because that, if you want to understand the real benefit of that, the way that I like to think about it is like, how many hacks away is this information? If it's sitting on a LastPass or whatever you use somewhere, I'm not saying that their security is leaky. I don't know, but it's one hack away, right? Like, if someone hacks it, like, you're done. Whereas if it sits in sort of, as you mentioned, it's kind of like sharded and encrypted manner, then you would need to kind of go, party by party by party by party that stores a little bit of that information and hack all of them individually to like get that information, which for a big enough network just becomes completely prohibitive.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about, what sets Nillion apart from others in the ecosystem. I'm sure, there are some other entrants, or maybe possibly not because it's in the Web3 decentralized space. What do you guys see that really sets Nillion apart?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are definitely multiple people looking into this, innovating, making a lot of like serious, not 10%, but 10x improvements in the way that then like this computation works and to make it more efficient and all that kind of stuff. I think what sets us apart is that we are also trying to do that. We are also trying to like push the boundaries, make improvements. We have done so in the past on several occasions. Um, I think what sets us apart is that we're essentially trying to just pool all of those resources. Like you've got different paradigms, like multi-party compute, which is mainly what we've been talking about, and also our focus. But you've also got homomorphic encryption. You've got all kinds of other technologies that each kind of shine in specific situations and then don't perform well in others. And that difference in this context is massive, right? Between being good at something or being bad at something. I'm talking about a difference that's like, you know, 1,000x slower or 10,000x x slower. So essentially, the ultimate end goal for us is to just build kind of like the pooling layer on top that takes care of all that complexity. Um, and I do feel like that is quite new, and we also see that in the in the traction that we've been able to pick up, and the people that build on on our technology are quite happy and satisfied with how simple it is actually to use this super state of the art technology.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about, you're an AI researcher. AI is very in vogue. We've even seen the narrative, and you guys are kind of doing this in Nillion. The Web3 AI fusion. Talk a little bit about kind of where you see like AI and Web3 kind of fusing, and what do you think the potential is there?
Yeah, sure. So I think straight off the bat, um, Web3 meets AI is an area with a lot of signal, but also a lot of noise, because you're essentially mixing like two, you're mixing two buzzwords, because let's face it, they are, um, which is bound to like, those, the noise coming from both angles is, multiplicative. Um, but I think a lot of people, and particularly the people in AI, are kind of seeing that large amount of noise and then just kind of like disregarding it. So I do think that it is an underlooked topic from the perspective of an AI researcher, like someone coming from traditional AI. Well, to answer your question, what is like what do you think once all the dust settles and the signal's what's left and the noise disappears? Then what's left, right? I think so. The way that I like to think about it is that AI becoming exponentially better has kind of like opened up this set of really big problems that no one has quite cracked yet. Like, for example, how do you make sure that an AI model is unbiased? Because people are getting opinions from it, etc., etc. How do you make sure that it is factual? How do you connect it to like an information system, which also no one's cracked yet? How do you make sure that like I don't send all of my information to Sam Altman and then Sam makes a pinky promise and he won't do anything bad with it? Like how do I avoid that? I think for some of these issues, Web3 is the answer. And specifically, where I think it is the answer is, I think it could be the answer to the privacy problem, to the problem I mentioned. How can I avoid sending all of my information to Sam and have him just like make a pinky promise not to do anything bad with it? Also think that it could be part of the answer to the computation problem. We're living in a massively computationally constrained era, basically. Actually, I think much more than data constrained. Um, if we're able to tap into all of the unused resources, like all the unused GPU resources, I think that could be part of the solution to that. So I'm talking now about like Deepin, like decentralized physical infrastructure, for example. Um, and lastly, I think that Web3 could also be part of the answer to more sort of the concentration of power issue. Because the requirements to train, to create basically, an AI model of note, let's say, are extremely high. We are seeing a concentration of power towards a very small set of companies that I think is unlike anything we've ever seen before. And that's quite a scary thought. And I do think that Web3 and decentralization is just a very natural counter movement to that, and could, bring some balance to that question, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So let me summarize. So privacy, of course, a manner in which we can either maybe prove humanity, or if people listen to the Privato ID, we talk about, like, let's say you were going to a nightclub, and instead of presenting your entire ID with your address, with your like gender, with your eye color, all of that information, you could just send, the age, and it could just say like, yes, Jax is, old enough to enter. So privacy, definitely. Then we talked about decentralized, we could call it with cloud computing. So if we look at like Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, and probably Microsoft Azure, what do you think that is? Like 80% of the cloud computing market, if not more?
Probably.
Yeah, maybe like 90% or more. I'd be even, it could be even higher at that point. And then probably one thing that I didn't hear you mention, which has come up in a lot of episodes, is AI smart agents, and that like, Web3 and crypto could be, instead of, Mathias paying for his AWS bill, you could have, an AI that's so performant that they're getting paid, and then they're actually paying for their own like, cloud computing credits. What do you think of this like AI smart agents, and like that we might have these autonomous systems kind of, operating in the like cryptocurrency world?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably a topic that I missed when or just that I didn't give when I said that there are like these massive problems that no one's quite cracked yet. I think that's one of them. Like, how can you create performant autonomous LLMs? Which I think currently people do kind of overestimate how good agents are. But I do think that people probably underestimate how good they are like this time in 2 years, because we're just very bad at estimating exponential growth and thinking in terms of exponential progress. Sort of that said, I do think that it's a very natural progression, right? That you progress from sort of, a setup where, which is essentially like an online setup. Like, I ask a question, I send it to an LLM, and I just wait and I see, and I get a response, and then I do something with it, to more like an offline paradigm where I want to do something, and then the AI just kind of like takes care of it. I think that could also be an answer, like part of the answer, to the computational resources question, that I don't think a lot of people, I'm actually not too sure why, but I don't think a lot of people are really talking about, which is if you exit the sort of online computing paradigm, where you ask a question and you're waiting for a response, to more of an offline setting, where you ask a question, like, I don't know, figure it out at like some point. The restrictions or like the requirements in terms of speed, in terms of when exactly, like, can you wait to schedule this computation like at a more convenient time, like all those kind of topics, reduce the burden of a lot of problems in AI with regards to like the computational load.
Yeah, absolutely. And for people that are like a little confused about the AI smart agent, imagine, Jackson Boy, he has to go to Bitcoin Nashville, and he's got to book his flights, he's got to book his hotels, he has certain parameters. So similar to what you would tell like a travel agent or like an employee, is be like, hey, I need a bag, I need to leave at this time, I need to get back at this time. Instead of you going on each individual website, you can kind of send the AI out to do it, and then it would just deliver you the end result. Whereas we were talking about the LLM paradigm, where it's like, hey, looking for best flights from Medellin to Nashville, but it wouldn't do like the second order or like complete all of those tasks for you. So I think that's always a good way to visualize it. Is like you would now have an employee. And then for the exponential growth, like people are probably most familiar with ChatGPT. Go into ChatGPT, reduce the model to 3.5, and then try 4.0 and just feel the difference. And that's what, a year? Crazy.
Something like that, yeah.
And that's
Yeah,
just
exactly.
one. Or like I have
And
a friend in the
if you
AI
want to
video space where it's like, whoa, it's wild. But yeah, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is wild. And if you want to be even more surprised, like take a look at what came before, because indeed people are most familiar probably with ChatGPT. Like try GPT-2, which is kind of like, I mean, GPT-3 was the generation before it, but GPT-2 was before that. I think it was released in like, I want to say 2019, something like that. Maybe 2020. I'm not exactly sure, but like not, 20 years ago, right? Um, like just try it. It's like the step from that to GPT 3.5, which is ChatGPT, is incredible. Like it's a world of difference. So that is the like, and then take that difference and extrapolate. Um, so yeah, I think, I mean, AI is the words that it's ever going to be right now, right? Um, so yeah, it's very exciting to see how that evolves.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit because we talk a lot about Web3 on this show, but I think just a general discussion on like AI, generative AI, and kind of the applications of AI will be helpful for people like that are builders that can then take this information and be like, okay, how could I apply it to my project? How could I apply it to my future? Let's talk a little bit about some of that future because we talked about the exponential growth. So most people are familiar with the probably chat response LLM model where you just send something into ChatGPT or maybe you like paste a code snippet in and it's going to explain it to you. Where do you see like these future applications of AI and how it's going to shape just like general life and the business landscape?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the applications are like with any horizontal technology, it's like, yeah, where do you start? Like, do you want like the implications for legal industry, for marketing, for sales, whatever? Like the opportunities are endless. But I think in general, it's kind of blurring the line between structured and unstructured information. And because it's like, yeah, well, I mean, who cares about structured information because I just have like this interface that figures it out for me anyway. Um, so I think that's sort of one general, yeah, it's an abstraction layer on top of a lot of data, essentially, unlike anything we've ever seen before. So I just take that way of thinking about it and apply it to like literally anything. Like what if in the legal industry, which I probably know next to nothing about, but like what if you had an abstraction layer on top of like information like in your company and just in general, then what happens? And you see loads and loads and loads of companies, startups taking advantage of that and making these products that are genuinely like wow, especially to people who are not familiar with the AI industry and just domain experts. um, yeah, like for
Yeah.
example in the legal industry, like Harvey, yeah, for instance.
And Harvey, what are they? Does it write legal briefs? Do they do the research for it? And
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I'm not that familiar with exactly what they do, but it's like legal AI assistant kind of thing.
yeah, I'm such an AI user at this point. I mostly come from the ChatGPT paradigm. I used to work on AI code explanations at Google, and that's an interesting problem to solve. Like you now have for the people that are the developers in the ecosystem, there Microsoft, I believe, released Copilot. We had an internal version. I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to talk about it, but it would essentially code complete a lot of the lines that you were writing. So like if you were writing like an if function, it would scan your code, it would put in the right variable. And did it work all the time? No, but you have to think like in a year, in 2 years, like are you really writing unit tests anymore? Kind of scary. And then also like let's say you're running, a business like we have all the Web3 founders in here. You're trying to generate Twitter content. As we know right now, LLMs for some reason are abysmal at creating like Twitter threads and things like that. But like in a year, 2 years, what's like, do you really need copywriters? TBD. It's just really enabling like really, or here's another thing. It's like, you might not be an expert on writing newsletters, but you can like query these to like come from an expert perspective. Like when I wanted to improve this podcast, I asked ChatGPT a disgusting amount of questions, and it really helped. So, just my short little rant on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the applications are endless, right? Like I use ChatGPT like every single day, honestly. Um, and I think on the topic of builders, I think in a recent interview, I think it was Sam Altman that said, like, the sort of sniff test to see if your AI startup idea is good is probably to, how would you feel watching an OpenAI announcement with a sense of excitement or a sense of, oh shit, I could be out of a business tomorrow. And that's probably like a good sniff test if you're on the right side of the exponential curve, basically.
I used to joke at Google that we'd all have to go back to school to become plumbers because like actual physical robots, like plumbers, masseuses, like anything with the hands, because these jobs. I think I'm not. It will be the people that can obviously use these tools to their advantage, but to me, on a long enough timeline, like I don't know how many people are working, which maybe seems like the doomer pill for some people. It might seem like the dream that they don't have to work, but it is a very interesting thing because yeah, people are very bad at estimating exponential growth, and they might, Peter Thiel has this famous saying at Founders Fund where it's like we were promised flying cars and we got 120 characters being like the Twitter limit for a tweet, and you're just like,
Yeah.
that's funny, but like I just think we're underestimating the time frame in which these things can come about.
Yeah, I mean, I've also heard that, I've heard that analogy as well. Like, the brightest minds of several years ago were building rockets, and the brightest minds of today are making Snapchat filters and stuff like that. I get that. Like, I think there is some truth in that. Um, but yeah, I mean, at the same time, you could also say the brightest minds of this many years ago were like, just neck deep in like super deep financial things that are like very little impact on the real world, except for making everything go down in 2008. And the brightest minds of today are figuring out what intelligence is, and building like the first artificial and super intelligence. So like, there is some truth in it, yes. But I think it's also a little bit unfair to, as like a blanket statement.
Yeah. Let me also defend the mortgage-backed security real quick because I used to work at BlackRock on these. A great innovation, let me say, increased liquidity and all that good stuff. But yes, you find the same time with derivative platforms. I don't know how familiar you are with like liquid restaking and all of these things. It's like when you start stacking derivatives on, like we're talking about financial investments. When you start stacking derivatives, let's say you have a derivative that tracks the price of the gold commodity, and then you start stacking another derivative on top of the derivative that tracks the gold market. So like then if the underlying asset goes down, you can essentially like have a liquidation event of all of those underlying derivatives. So it's just like derivatives on derivatives, just in my experience, never goes particularly well when the when things go poorly. But
Yeah.
pivoting back to the AI discussion and your work here at Nillion. So what do you think some of the biggest challenges are for AI researchers, and like how you see your field kind of evolving?
It's a good question. So I think, I mean, for AI researchers, I think there is one particular trend that I think is extremely interesting to kind of think about the implications on, is that if you're an AI researcher today, you probably won't want to do research at a university, like an academic institution, but rather at a private institution, like at a company, which I think is quite new. That that phenomenon, I don't think that has really ever happened like at scale, where if you want to push like the academic boundaries in a field, they don't do that in a university anymore. So I think that's a really interesting conundrum that a lot of researchers kind of face. I think as for what I think the future of AI research will be, I mean, I think like it's a massively exciting thing, and it's rightfully attracting a lot of talent. But still feel like it will always be a sort of underserved, like a permanently underserved thing for quite a long time, because it just the demand is growing at a very rapid pace. But I don't think the supply can keep up, because ultimately, like I think a lot of people actually have like no facts to back this up, but somehow I think that a lot of people would want to enter AI research because the demand is growing, presumably, and then realize like, oh well, actually, the reality of AI research is not like fantasizing about super intelligence, actually like super low level and really difficult. And like what I assume for like 95 or maybe even more percent of the population, like super boring. um, so I think because of that, there will be like a very structural gap between demand and supply. Like same
Yeah.
with GPU stuff. Because I think AI research is very interesting. I think GPU research is a little bit less interesting, shoot me. But I think the same thing's happening there. Like if you're really passionate about like GPU kernel optimization and stuff like that, I mean, that's probably the best situation to be in, like go. But I think very, very, very few people think that the kinds of topics that come up in GPU kernel optimization are particularly interesting.
Yeah, I much prefer the pontificating about. Yeah, I used to be the more of the builder, and now I prefer much more of the talking head. So everyone's got to find their space. I prefer the speculation.
True, but if you are if you're interested in something that the vast majority of people are not interested in, then that's just like the definition of arbitrage. Then
Absolutely.
like that is what you should do. That's also the advice that like the armchair psychologist advice that I give to people who are kind of like figuring things out. Is just find a thing that you think is extremely interesting that most people think is super boring. Like whatever that is, that's probably quite good because the supply in that is extremely low, presumably.
Yeah, I remember when I was looking at starting this podcast, I mapped out there's probably like only like 6 active Web3 podcasts. And I'm just like, oh, that's great. Not much competition. Perfect. I'm handsome, funny, charismatic, and incredibly humble. I'm going to crush these fools. So let's talk a little bit about there might be some Web2 developers and they're thinking like, wow, like I am interested in AI. Like I do want to transition and maybe like apply this in the Web3 space. How would you recommend people like, are there any resources you would call out or any like the 80-20 of like how to take like a Kotlin developer and getting them like proficient in AI in a certain amount of
Yeah.
time?
Cut through a lot of the noise in Web3 and also like accept that this noise exists. Like yes, like reputationally, like personally, reputationally, is it like a super good move to like enter a space that's like dominated, at least the mind share of like the average person of it is like dominated by like really silly stuff. Like, is that going to be wonderful for your reputation? Like, probably not. Um, but don't underestimate like the the builder aspect of it, which I think is something that is generally um, kind of forgotten, or like not a lot of people are really familiar with, especially like traditional, Web2 AI people, just Web2 people in general, which is actually just like really fun, to be honest. Like it's very reminiscent of like early days internet,
Absolutely.
where you just like I don't know, like remember I think I'm like just old enough to kind of like say that I remember this, kind of like the days where you would just like open a file and maybe it plays like the new Black Eyed Peas album, or maybe it crashes everything in your computer and just deletes all data. Like I don't know, you just like click the button and roll the dice, right? And you just like
Mm-hmm.
figure it out. Now, of course, it's a much more safe environment for like our parents and grandparents to like do stuff as well without risking their life every single second. Um, but the Web3 space is like still on that wild sort of cowboy era, and I think that's just a lot of fun, to be honest. So I think that is sort of the message in combination with like cutting through the noise, there is a lot of signal, and decentralization actually makes sense for a lot of AI problems. It's probably the message that I would give to like Web3, Web2 folks looking into like maybe exploring sort of this Web3 spaces could be quite interesting to do. And as for how to get started, yeah, I mean, I think probably a good place to start is that there's so much lingo and like so much stuff about like, yeah, chains and L1s and L2s and staking and this and that and blah blah blah. You don't need to like understand everything immediately. Just like accept that you're at the start of a learning curve and just tackle it piece by piece. Talk to people, have an open mindset, and just learn it. I mean, it's especially if you're in AI, you're probably used to that feeling of like something new happening and then realizing that you actually know nothing about it, and then you have to go from being an expert in whatever you do to a beginner again. But honestly, if you have a learning mindset, I mean that's the fun part, right?
Absolutely, and I love the learning and the new challenges, and people building on the frontier is a lot more exciting than like, I don't know, if people are interested in like high yields, crop yields, fair enough, but I prefer this side of the internet.
Exactly. And I also think that, like, maybe adding on to that, honestly, I think that the average Web3 startup is doing things that are a lot deeper, a lot harder, and a lot more interesting than the average Web2 startup, to be perfectly honest. Like, I think the average Web2 startup is like a payroll or accounting B2B SaaS software that's much more about like, okay, let's make something that's not like the most horrible thing I've ever seen and just like sell it. I mean, the space is massive. Just like, I mean, presumably some company will want to buy our accounting software. I don't know. I just don't think from a builder's point of view, that's not a particularly enticing thing. Whereas in Web3, I think the average startup is like, oh, we're building like this new cryptographic primitive that we've got like researchers from, like the top minds in this field doing like this, and they wave their hands a lot and say all kinds of words that you don't understand. And it's like, oh, well, actually, those are the two options. I probably know which one I'll take, to be honest. Yeah.
And
So,
another
yeah.
thing is you don't get all this tech debt. Like you get tech debt, of course, but like if you're working at like an Oracle, you're scraping by. I remember at Google, we'd have these like frameworks that were built in like the mid 2000s that you're just like stitching together with tape and like sometimes just having to rip it out. And if you're building on the frontier, you're pretty much using all new tech, and that has its own drawbacks as well. But it's I think a lot cooler. So let's talk a little bit about some of the upcoming milestones that Nillion has, and then kind of where they can get involved with Nillion and get involved with you and follow you on social media.
Yeah, sure. So actually, it's quite an exciting time for us. We're having a token pre-sale at the moment on CoinList, so it's actually active right now as of yesterday, and it will be active until I think like June 26th. So depending on when this comes out, maybe there's like another day left or so. Yeah, and then our testnet is live, and all eyes on the mainnet, of course. Um, so yeah, it's a really exciting time. And as for how people can engage with Nillion, yeah, if you're interested, like join our Discord, follow us on Twitter, on like social media. Um, yeah, like build with our technology and see what kind of cool thing you can come up with. Like we often joke internally, like that the most exciting thing that will be built on Nillion is something that we don't know exists. Like if you're an expert in like whatever, right? And you see this and you hear what I'm saying about like blind computing and all this kind of stuff, and you think, well, I do this job for like this company that me personally I probably never heard of, doing this function that probably me I didn't even know exist, and like this could solve this very specific problem. Like, yeah, go for it. Probably no one has tried it, so like shoot, like go build. So yeah, that's probably the message that I would give, and follow us on
Absolutely.
social.
Absolutely, and I'll put all the links down in the description, and everyone go try out Nillion. If you guys are planning on being at Bitcoin in Nashville, which I highly recommend, use my promo code Jax to get a cheaper ticket. So thank you to all the builders out there, and go forth and start using AI, start using Nillion, and start building some cool startups. Talk to you all soon.